by now we have a lot of more information available. Even architecture structures.
Session, two papers will be presented. The papers entitled The Status of Folklore in Indian Society and its Discourse, a theoretical viewpoint, will be presented by Professor Jawaharlal Nehru. And the paper entitled A Call for Decolonizing Folkloristics of Bangladesh by Professor Sir Jamil Ahmed. We have two discussants who will speak on the papers. The session is chaired by Professor Ulova.
You invited me?
Yes, I'm calling. I will now request Professor Jawaharlal Nehru, Professor Sir Jamil Ahmed, Professor M. Shahinur Rahman, Dr. Firoz Mahmood and Professor Ulova to come onto the stage and take their seats.
Open Bangladesh paper somewhere. There must be a paper for Bangladesh. Go to somewhere.
Alphabetically,
No, it's somewhere.
Is it title paper for Bangladesh?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Bangladesh embassy letter?
Bangladesh letter.
Is file.
No. It will be paper file. I know it. No, it is not. It's not. You open again and find out paper.
So, good afternoon everybody. So until we get started, if you read the program, Professor Frank Corom was supposed to chair this session, but we heard he just arrived. Unfortunately, he missed one plane, but he's here with us. But he could not join us yet, so I was asked instead of him to take this position of chairing this first. Again, he's very young, we know, but he's also the grand old man of Indian folkloristics and international folkloristics. So it is my great honor to give words now to Professor Jawaharlal Nehru from Mysore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm behind you. I'm going there now.
Please take that.
That's not a small time. I think I know him for 50 years almost. And I have visited Bangladesh many times. This is not my first visit. I have already fallen in love with Bangladesh. And this is a wonderful opportunity again after such a long time that we are aging, but we still meet and perform the same duty which was. I want to thank you, Professor Shamsama Khan. I also want to congratulate you on this new assignment, okay? I know you are a very great academician and a wonderful organizer. I have written it in print also, that you can manage things well. Thank you again for calling me. I have written a paper and I will read it before you. The same version is available there. And I am the status of folklore in Indian society and discourse. That's the title of my paper. A theoretical viewpoint. It's a brief thing, but I want to present before you. So many speakers in this morning's session spoke of Indian civilization, both synchronically and diachronically. I am almost certain that the basic paradigm of Indian folklore in terms of its multidimensional structure, themes, meaning, function, and the current use seems to be very much shared in almost all parts of the subcontinent. It's not a claim, but I feel we are sharing many concerns in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, and many other places. If one pays to see the presence of this paradigm on the surface, it is because it has a substatus and reveals its nature by a small effort of comparison interpretation. Although one can explain the historical reasons of this phenomenon, yet I believe that the similarity can developments in the form of independent multiple versions in folklore that have taken place on parts of the subcontinent. Discourse has been defined in various ways in many disciplines. Most of these methods of analysis of language, cognition, interaction, society, and culture. I unquote. One must also realize that the classification of discourse in India from oral to written, classicalization, not classification, sorry. One must also realize that the classicalization of discourse in India from oral to written, from non-power to power, from collective to individual, and from non-ownership to rigid ownership as one finds in classical written tradition of discourse, despite its excellent qualities in many areas of human inquiry, many discourse a product, a kind of goods, which added, besides the economic and other dimensions, the dimension of poverty. Consider, for example, the following remarks of Michel Foucault. I quote, "In our culture, and doubtless in many others, discourse was not originally a product, a thing, a kind of goods. It was essentially an act placed in the bipolar field of sacred and the profane, the illicit and the licit, the religious and the blasphemous. Historically, it was a gesture fraught with risks before becoming goods caught up in the circuit of ownership." Unquote. The paradigm of historical discourse also suffered the same fate as the classical literary discourse. In many senses, these were interchangeable discourses. They exaggerated the false stories of kings and their past surroundings. This discourse and place for the folk or their lore and has not only humankind and helped the hegemony of power politics and domination despite many changes that took place from time to time in India. Even in the modern political system, the steps of historical discourse, a discourse which cannot be studied in a traditional positivist way by studying it from different statistical or strategic angles, but by inventing an ideological code and method which subsumes different approaches so that we can grasp the underlying forces which have caused gaps in history and prevented our understanding of the essence of this important discourse and its civilizing potential. Naturally, this leads us to the important question of what is written and what is oral. I guess most of us know how, now that the paradigm of written histories has completely relied on the written and documents or the intentionally created iconic artifact and has therefore inevitably become a prisoner of the idiosyncratic written testimony that has been created to survive. This element of intention in due course added the dimension of power politics and hegemony to it, which were used as tools for harming the interests of the marginalized and powerless by perpetuating an order that was not true. So history became a mono-paradigm. This discourse of this paradigm of the palace became the civilizing discourse of civilizations. History as a genre became blurred. The strength of a culture and a civilization began to be reckoned only in terms of stone structures, palaces, forts, stone, bravery. Even today we define and teach about human civilizations within the confines of the same paradigm. If we find today mankind, particularly on the Indian subcontinent, directionless and in dilemma, the paradigm of writing histories cannot escape the blame. We need to find ways and means to reverse this paradigm without delaying the issue further. In doing so, we need to find alternative sources of history, writing in a public cultural setting so that we can rethink the historical consciousness of the Indian subconscious. It is possible only when we decide to trust oral discourse and its potential for performing this task. We need to open a communicative action dialogue. I am using Habermas's words, communicative action dialogue, with those communities in developing this new historical discourse who have preserved history in their collective memories and in oral discourse, both in real and symbolic forms, so that in due course we begin seriously redoing. I am not using the word, I am avoiding the use of the word rewriting, okay, which is the writing which causes these troubles. So I want to say we can redo this by other method, maybe memorizing, maybe do something. If people can remember Bhagavad Gita and Ramayana, they can as well remember at least some pieces of their own history. There is nothing wrong in that. Writing creates trouble. It has already created. So, in doing so, in developing this new historical discourse, we have preserved history in their collective memories and in oral discourse, both in real and symbolic forms, so that in due course we begin seriously redoing, I am avoiding the use of the word rewriting, the history or histories of the subcontinent. Feudal societies and literature. Indian society, in the Indian context, and I guess in the context of the other neighboring countries, and rewards by the powerful and highly influential institutions. Remember, Nobel Prize was award in India is given by big businessmen, right? If you are writing or remembering or narrating discourse and stories, it's for business. Why do you need thoughts are necessary? For communicating, there are no awards needed. This should be treated as a hegemonic way. Wrong. It is misleading. Please think about it. Indian collective subconscious structure also capable for narrative discourse was subverted for civilizing both children and the adults. I am sure it is Göttingen institution which was created by Hitler himself to use folklore for his own purpose, for his not fascist policies. I suppose both children and adults. One of the important evidences that one can lay upon in the case of Indian literature is the case of Indian literature. India has a long and I suppose a glorious ancient tradition of written literature, the origin of which can be traced to Vedas and other ancient literary works. This long tradition seems to be more than 6,000 years old. Yet we find no clear evidence that this mighty literary activity ever addresses the problems of the common folk of this land. Except the Bhakti movement, which also did not succeed fully in transforming the structure of Indian society, Indian literature, it would seem, remained imprisoned in the confines of the palace paradigm till the beginning of the last century, up to 1930-31. One does not find literature, written literature in India, as I said, at least until the modern times, becoming an instrument, indeed a small instrument of social change. Somebody has to answer me and tell me if the concern of social change and changing society is not the concern of discourse, then why should we discuss discourse at all? Some people, some poets sometimes argue with me that it is not their business to change society. Okay, we accept it, then it's not our business to discuss our poetry also. It's a public, if we are in the public forum discussing the discourse, then share the responsibility that you are misleading this whole mankind. So it's not only written literature and the historical space which became subordinate to the palace paradigm, but most of the social behaviors of rural Indian society yielded to this paradigm. Indian classical music, for instance, dance and drama, cuisine, customs, philosophical discourse, language, religion, literary discourse, and literary folklore, which had a much wider mass base and the sharing potential. All these became subordinate to the same paradigm I'm talking about. Therefore, it was natural that oral discourse, such as the common fairy tales and modern similar, ideology's most supreme views is to delimit a kind of preserved sector which having discussed summarily from a theoretical point of view, the diachronic aspects of the Indian society that have and by and large are dominating its regularities, I would like to turn to the synchronic conditions of these regularities and try to assess the relations these could have with orality and oral discourse and its impact on the notions of civil society we have in our minds. Historical conditions of Indian subcontinent have made, and not unexpectedly, considering the critical treatment I try to offer in the above set pages, a big divide between the literate and the illiterate, and the haves and the have-nots. Most of the population of the country is illiterate. They can't read and write. I wonder sometimes, if 80% people of India cannot read and write, for whom Indians are writing books? Somebody has to tell me, why should we write books? Who is reading them in the first place? And if 80% population cannot read and write in my country, then why are we basing our all calculations and every strategy on the basis of written documents? Why don't we study the discourse, which is an orality? How can you talk about development when people don't understand what kind of development you are offering? You don't take this consideration. They are very serious issues. That if people are illiterate, what's the use of books? That's the point. Discourse's impact on the notion of civil society we have in our minds. Historical conditions, okay, I try to offer the above. Most of the population of the country in every era of the history of this country. So what purpose this great literary tradition could have served than to produce in this country was not shared with the marginalized. Actually, it was denied to them. Javed Chand Meghani, who gave lectures in Bombay University, millions of the working people, the experts and others keep talking big about them, but actually very few treat them as true human beings. They are treated as by separate standards, okay? And, I'm sorry, Very few treat them as true human beings, like their own kind. Today, villagers have become objects of compassion. They are treated by separate standards. And besides the common villagers who have another chunk of human population, maybe millions, who are labeled as tribal people and who too are treated as separate from the educated elite. Therefore, I believe that folklore is a window to know the mind and the soul of these people. Should we take 1 century to understand even this simple thing? Jawaharlal Nehru said in 1941, India was not free. India was free after 7 years. Therefore, I believe that the folklore is a window to know the mind and soul of these people. Their songs and literature tell us that their desire of us, that despite their funny knowledge, funny rituals, terrible poverty, and complete illiteracy, not of their choice, but forced by circumstances of history, these wild people have joys and sorrows like the rest of humankind. That life should be sad, desperate, and full of poverty, and wandering in the jungles of superstition and misery is not a life they wanted for themselves. They need courage and sustenance as much as they need food. Yet there is some kind of living source of joy and satisfaction flowing underneath this animal existence, and it is frightening silence. This satisfaction is realized in their songs and music and dances. This is then the culture of these people. Unquote. It seems that under these conditions, people created their own discourse and a public space that kept them alive and existing. The discourse is now called folklore. That this discourse does not suffer from weaknesses and other problems is not the point here. Even written and rewritten and polished, sophisticated discourse also has good and bad qualities. The real issue is that this discourse is essential to the controversy. I would like to argue that this discourse of the majority of the people deserves to be given some attention. It demands to be collected, preserved, and studied in its own right. Once we do that, then only can we consider if this discourse has any use for societies in the present conditions of the subcontinent. Jurgen Habermas I have a couple of pages more, Mr. Chairman. You are not bored yet? No.
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, maybe less. Maybe, no, I need more. When their voices, and I'm talking about our discourse, and it is all known what discourse it is and how it is the concern of the people who speak it, who use it, and they don't know about other discourse. They're illiterate and they're marginalized. Now, the question is that does it say something about what I am trying to say? Yes, I think so. Your animal tale is a very good example, and Bangladesh has lots of them. You can see animals in the real world are that a rat can never kill an elephant. All right? A small cat cannot kill a lion. But in folklore, it's always the small which becomes wise and succeeds. It's a reversal, right? Now, this is a desire to change society. This is a desire to make the powerful less powerful and make the small powerful. The other point is Holi. It's a very huge festival in India. It's a carnival. It's a carnival. And I think Bhaktin, he never studied Holi, but I think his theory works very well with it. Holi, you must see its discourse, what happens on that day. They want to make everybody look same. All caste system, hierarchy, everything breaks down by using color, which makes everybody same. And then there are other things also following. For one day, people get drunk, people touch each other, people hug each other, people do certain things which they cannot do the previous day or the day after. For one day, a catharsis is achieved by that. And next day, they are the same boxes have come up again at 10 o'clock. Everybody is same again. The world begins the same thing. The order has not changed. The attempted disorder and change as a kind of a frustration, and the desire for this change comes in the form of a catharsis finally. If Holi was not celebrated in India for a long time, I think there would have been some terrible problems, right? These are my 2 points, and then let me go to the tradition and development and finish this thing and apologize to my chairperson. Very often, I have to talk about development of pain and misery. Let me repeat it. And the history of experience of pain and misery of common folk who belong to the past and who were raised to ground. Thank you very much.
Professor Jalal Andu, for your illuminating and thought-provoking paper. Now, I would like to call upon our next speaker, Professor Syed Jamil Ahmed, to present his paper on A Call for Decolonizing Folkloristics of Bangladesh. Professor Syed Jamil Ahmed.
This is the title of my presentation, and I begin by making this small statement that having participated as a resource person in a recently concluded series of workshops on folkloristics curated by Bangla Academy in Rajshahi, Cox's Bazar and Dhaka in 2012, it struck me as perplexing that most of the field-level folklore collectors of Bangladesh still remain bogged in, borrowing from Ben Amos, early definitions of folklore clouded by romantic myths and haunted by the notion of popular antiquities. Needless to say, the state of affairs is treacherous, for if the conceptual apparatus is outmoded at the ground zero level, all the king's horses and all the king's men of folkloristics in Bangladesh will continue to turn round and round forever again, groping in the quagmire of empty shells and corpses of popular antiquities. Now, this is the structure of my presentation. This essay takes off from the erroneous conceptual obsession of the field-level folklore collectors of Bangladesh to explore why folkloristics is what it is today in Bangladesh. By examining the discontinuous strands of history inscribed on the notion of the folk. It proceeds in three parts. The first of these undertakes to exhume the legacy of the folk in the works of Orientalists in colonial South Asia, and the second continues to show how Orientalism of colonial folklorists established itself as latent Orientalism in the folkloristics of colonial Bengal, and how latent Orientalism was rendered transparent in East Pakistan and subsequently Bangladesh. The essay ends by arguing that unless the legacy of colonial village is uprooted by decolonizing the mind of the folklorists, the folkloristics of Bangladesh will continue to be the playground of romantic pastoralists driven by transparent Orientalism and dressed as post-colonial folklorists. This is the first part of my presentation. Now, when Venerable William J. Tone circulated the term folklore in 1846, he was seeking. Now, although Tone's project focused entirely on England, colonial British administrators and clergies in South Asia, such as Damon, Cloak, Knowles, Graves and Temple, and in some cases their family members such as Frere, Stephen, Swinnerton, Stokes, Brackett, Kingscote, appropriated folklore as a colonial enterprise permeated deeply in Orientalism, a mode of discourse with supporting institutions, vocabulary, scholarship, imagery, doctrines, even colonial bureaucracies and colonial styles, by which Europe was able to manage, even reduce the Orient politically, sociologically, militarily, ideologically, scientifically, and imaginatively, with the express intent of dominating, restructuring, and having the authority over the Orient. In this enterprise, Tone's parameter of folklore underpinned decidedly by the objective of rescuing the law, as the manners, customs, observances, superstitions, ballads, proverbs, etc. of the olden times of the folk as a rural peasantry was maintained with rigorous focus, which in turn strengthened Orientalist discourse and the colonial playground of South Asia. In attempting to demonstrate how the project was accomplished, I'll first show what folklore represented, that is, what this notion stood for. Flora and Steele pursued Orientalist representation of the folk by arguing that all the stories presented in a collection of tales of Punjab are strictly folk tales because they were current among a people who can neither divulge all that they know and play for his private benefit. It is thus that he succeeds in gathering a large harvest. His are all hazy and muddled. As a detail to his image, he offers what he calls his favorite theory that to the average villager one meets in Punjab and North India, religion is coming under new revenue laws. The village is trying to understand the new lawmakers, the people who call the new ruler the Firingi and made him the son, is the presence of the ubiquitous Munshi, who often collaborated with the colonial collectors, as their native Eastern language is and has seldom been challenged. Now, what did Tone's parameter of folklore speak for, and what did it act for in the colonial structure of knowledge generation? Richard Dawson answers quite explicitly. Two powerful motives impel the overseas folklorists: a desire to test in a living laboratory the new anthropological hypothesis of Tyler concerning primitive man, and a wish to improve colonial government through a sympathetic knowledge of subject people. Intellectual and administrative ends thus happily coincided with fortuitous results for folklore collecting. Edwin Hertland, the president of Folklore Society from 1899 to 1901, articulates the Orientalist intent more explicitly. He argued that if the prime consideration to a statesman is the proper government and well-being of the native tribes under our, that is, the imperial sway, then by no means as effectual as the methodical study of the people and their customs and beliefs, that is folklore, can their government be secured. And as a final word of caution, he admonished the imperial statesman thus: no ruler who does not understand his subject can govern them for the best advantage, either theirs or his. Richard Temple goes further in attempting to establish the folkloristics as a quasi-scientific field of study by latching his argument brazenly in Orientalist agenda. But firstly, he asks an apparently innocuous question in the language of a hunter. If the object of a hunt in the byways of rustic life is to serve up dainty dishes for the general reader, is it worthwhile? Then he serves the answer quite pompously. Just as physiologists are enabled by a minute and exact examination of skulls, or teeth, or hair, and so on, to differentiate or connect the various races of mankind, so should folklorists be able to provide reliable data towards a true explanation of the reason why particular peoples are mentally what they are found to be. As an Orientalist, Temple surveys the Orient from above with the aim of getting hold of the whole sprawling panorama of Bengal as a land of bounty, began to drive an emergent Bengali Hindu nationalism in the words of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Rabindranath Tagore, and others. The notions of the folk and the village were invested in this project with the upward nationalist objective. Accompanying all this idea was of a Bengali folk situated in the countryside and evincing, as against the artificiality of the city of Calcutta, the qualities of the Bengali heart. The village, as opposed to the city, became the true spiritual home of the urban Bengalis. The point not to be missed is that in this idyllic village, touched heavily with pastoral kitsch, was very much a Hindu home, where the Muslims were at best accorded the status of valued guests, if perceived docile. It was Lal Bihari Dey who inaugurated Bengali nationalist folklorists, but ironically enough, retained the Orientalist notion of the folk and its concomitant conception of the village. Indeed, as Dey's preface to his groundbreaking collection titled Folk Tales of Bengal shows, his objective is in stride with nationalist assertion, although it slides ambivalently between the polarities of similarity and difference. He testifies, the daily increasing literature of folklore proves that the swarthy and half-naked peasant on the banks of the Ganges is a cousin, albeit of the 100th remove, to the fair-skinned and well-dressed Englishman on the bank of the Thames. That Dey's peasant, almost the same but not quite as Baba would say, is invested with authority to menace the Englishman by generating mimicry, but who nevertheless remains a peasant, that is the Orientalist folk, and that he vouchsafes his collection as a genuine sample of the old stories told by old women from age to age through 100 generations is no surprise, because it was Temple who had spurred Dey to folkloristics. Perhaps it would be no exaggeration to claim that beginning with Dey, all Bengali folklore collectors imitated the colonial masters in mobilizing the Orientalist toolkit. Consider, for example, Rabindranath Tagore, who championed folklore as a nationalist cause, but was nevertheless trapped in latent Orientalism. Building his theory of folk literature on the writings of Dinesh Chandra Sen, Rabindranath collapses different times with a poetic license that would, as Divesh Chakraborty observes, defy the logic of the historian. Perhaps the most important contribution that Rabindranath makes in folkloristics of colonial Bengal is that he overrides non-material lore with literature and mobilizes the genre by explicating key notions such as Lok Sahitya, folk literature, and Gramya Sahitya, rural literature, in two of the 4 essays collected in the volume titled Lok Sahitya. By initiating this literary turn of folkloristics in colonial Bengal, Rabindranath had completely missed the point that folklore and literature are not the same thing, as Prof argues convincingly. The changeability of folklore compared with the stability of literature singles out its performative character, which proves fallacious any attempt to preserve it, as there was not attempted by annihilating the Orientalists. Nevertheless, preserving folklore as folk literature, which is underpinned by Hindu nationalism trapped in latent Orient village, when he asserts that the dialect spoken in the country 500 years ago remains unchanged in the colloquial language of our backward villages, not subjected to influences of the outside world. Chandra Kumar Dey refers to Man Singh ballad as rustic songs. His representation of a romantically imagined chanted memory of his idyllic village is a fabled land of milk and honey, where there is no doubting ancient agrarian social life. Now, in 1938, this nationalist drive in the folklorists of Bengal shed some of its perception of the village as a spiritual home, endowed with the sacredness and beauty of the Hindu, by allotting greater attention to the Muslim majority Eastern Bengal, when Eastern Bengal Folklore Collection Society was established at the University of Dhaka. Subsequently, with the creation of Pakistan in 1947, the normative nationalist drive in the folkloristics began to accommodate a cultural identity of the Bengalis in which the Muslims ceased to be perceived as outsiders. Muhammad Naziruddin, hailed as one of the pioneers of South Asian folkloristics, contributed substantially in traversing the Hindu-Muslim gap in the nationalist drive underpinning the folkloristics of Bengal. Nevertheless, latent Orientalism has been pervasive in the new breed of Muslim folklorists of Bengal, subsequently East Pakistan, to the extent that the notion of the folk and law attained ubiquitous and uninterrogated transparency. For instance, Muhammad Naziruddin followed the tradition of folk literature exemplified by Rabindranath and Ashutosh Bhattacharya, and relentlessly struggled to collect the songs from uneducated masses, fakirs, Vaishnavite mendicants, uncultured rural people and boatmen, which collection in turn makes explicit the constituency of the folk in his theoretical landscape. Joshimuddin, another eminent folklorist, unhesitatingly deploys the folk as a product of idyllic village smacking heavily of pastoral kitsch. In the 1960s, folkloristics of East Pakistan was presented with an unprecedented opportunity to exercise the folk as a common people. However, when discussing folk ballads, he chooses Dinesh Chandra published version compiled in Eastern Bengal ballads. Furthermore, he examines ecstatically, when he exclaims ecstatically that the homes described in Eastern Bengal ballads are all Bangladeshi. The landscape, the rivers and rivulets, tanks and fields are all of Bangladesh. Nationalist penchant for pastoral romanticism is all too apparent. With a similar fondness for a timeless, ahistorical and self-contained village tradition, it's done the rural population. Now, in spite of the failure of eminent folklorists of Bangladesh to eradicate the Orientalist virus, folkloristics of Bangladesh received a fresh impetus to familiarize itself with contemporary folkloristics of the world when Shamsud Khan curated a series of workshops at Bangla Academy in the 1980s. As a result, folklorists of Bangladesh were introduced to the latest defining parameter of folklore, its genres and classification, type and motive index, and a host of other key notions, as well as research methodology. Furthermore, classic trained folklorists of Bangladesh in fieldwork and folklorists from Finland conducted extensive field research with their Bangladeshi counterparts. In 1998, Rajshahi University inaugurated institutional education in folkloristics. Consequently, no one can deny that folklorists in Bangladesh are abreast of current trends in world folkloristics. Further, they are welcome signs of change because Shamsud Khan's pioneering research on contextual folkloristics and Shushmita Chakraborty's groundbreaking work on urban and feminist folkloristics. Nevertheless, the erroneous constating demonstrates the gene of the folk produced and generated by Messrs. Thoms, Temple, Day, et al. Is still implanted in many folklorists of Bangladesh who continue to grapple with the mission to rescue the lore of olden times by means of timely exertion from the illiterate peasant of rural Bangladesh. Ironically, the blinkered vision of folkloristics underpinned by the perception of the village on the folkloristics of colonial South Asia, it was an act of sly civility of the Bhavan kind, if only because between the Western sign and colonial It is this colonial construction of a reverse image of the English village that continues to colonize the minds of the folklorists of Bangladesh. Now, when I call for decolonization of folkloristics of Bangladesh, I call for decolonization not by reversing the empire with the nation, but by Fanos cultural difference. Paradoxically, as this examination has shown, decolonization takes place neither by the rising tide of nationalism nor by territorial evacuation. 80% of the farmers in Bangladesh now own mobile phones, which they use to estimate the market demand for crops. Over 1 million solar power systems covering 50,000 villages provide benefit to 8 million people. Consequently, Hudson's rural penalty, defined as the poverty mainly due to distance, poor connectivity, and asymmetric information, has removed many of the glaring signs of stark poverty, and at the same time, globalization has penetrated its tenacious tentacles with surest precision. When such is the actual rural setting, then it is necessary to jettison the obsolete yardstick of urbanity that Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics still fondly employs. Densely populated.
Very much, Professor Saifullah, for your brilliant Rahman to give his comments on the papers.
Professor Sir Jamil Ahmed, my mentor and Mahaguru Professor Henry Glass is sitting in front of me, and Professor Shafi Jaman Khan, who already inspires me to study folklore. Honorable foreign delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Actually, I'm dependent on my ears today because I didn't have my papers in my hand. So, largely depending on memorization and my conceptual understanding, I have to make comments on what I have heard from the presentation. Professor Hindu has tried to present much neglected idea that folklore is in essence a big narrative of power, oppression and pain and mass voice of the people for change and better conditions. And he has tried to make the difference between oral discourse and the written discourse. And it seems that oral discourse is dominant than the written discourse. Actually, I'm not going to talk about the contents and the examples that we find in his article. I am especially interested in talking about the oral transmission and the influence of oral discourse. You know that things that since time unknown, things have been coming generations after generations till today orally. And folklore is the essence of modernism. If Rabindranath takes modernism, I am talking about it because my influence the folklorists. And in that case, Rabindranath is really a folklorist and a Baul. And you know that he followed Folklor, and he was followers of Folklor. Professor Hindu talked about society. Very often we people do not try to understand how folklore is always with us and how we are dealing with folklore every day in our daily life, even at our home. And that is really a very pathetic story for our life. Now, my point is that if we have to think about the exploration of the studies of folklore in the new perspectives of present time, we need to situate all the aspects of our society, of our culture, of our nation, of our life from the folkloristic points of views. And for this, we have to possibly go far and we have to change our mindset. Belong to the that is to what you say, to the people who claim to be civilized. They went, for example, Indian subcontinent. They came to Indian subcontinent and they tried to civilize us, and they tried to introduce their culture, their tradition, to us, and in this way they tried to change our mindset, and thus things had been established. Although now
and antiquarian paradigms dominated the folklore of India. He has referred in particular to the palace paradigm as a powerful discourse which has engulfed Indian society. This backward past, according to him, has created a serious challenge in adopting a modern approach to the study of folklore. And he cited examples to make his point clear. I did not elaborate. You will have opportunities to make comments on his paper and ask him questions. My interest lies precisely in Professor Jamil Ahmad's paper, which is more relevant to the study of folklore in Bangladesh. Professor Ahmed